It's 8:48. I've been quilting on this quilt all day. And don't you just love it when you think you've got all the squares done and then you realize there's one more to do? So I'm gonna get this one done and then it's on to the borders and then the binding and I'm done. Yay! So it's 11:48 at night and I just finished quilting all the main area of this quilt. All that's left to do now is to trim the edges and put the binding on it. And I'm really tired. But I was trying to think, how fun it is that once you finally finish your quilting, you get to lay it out and you kind of hold your breath because you're hoping that there's no catches in it or any pleats. And I was like, that's got to be my favorite part of quilting. But then I thought, no, I like the quilting part. But then I'm like, oh, I like the piecing too. So I think every part of quilting is fun. Um, there's little rewards in every part of it, honestly, from buying the fabric, finding the pattern, to choosing the thread. It's just every step of quilting has its own reward and it's fun. But yeah, so here it is. There it is. There is over 875 yards of thread in this. And I actually still learning how to do shapes, so my quilting is not that great, but I figure the more I do it, the better I'll get at it. There it is. And the really fun part is I haven't turned it over yet. Kind of scared to, but I've got to do it. So hold on. I'm hoping this fan doesn't drown out the sound, but I have to put my phone over here. I have the iPhone 6S. I still have the iPhone 6S, and the battery is running low again. Flip it over. Let's see how much damage is done. Just kidding. It turned out really pretty. And I'm glad that I decided to trim around the edge of the Dresden plate. It just really makes it look more like a flower. Let's see if I can close. It just turned out so pretty. And that's the strip that you see right there. That's the strip that I put in the back to make the fabric wide enough for the quilt. The quilt actually ended up being 88 by 99 inches. But you can see a few of the pleats that I got in there. Had I sprayed, spray basted the quilt, that I wouldn't probably have gotten those in there. But it's okay. probably, I don't know, I'm still learning how to know what to quilt first to keep the pleats down so that you don't get as many pleats. Hey guys, so it is Saturday morning and I am knee deep in binding. I'm finally putting the binding on this quilt. I am finally getting to the finishing of this quilt. I've been working on it for, I said 2 months yesterday, but I think it's, well, ever since March. So March, April, May, 3 months I've been working on this quilt. And I'm finally getting the binding on it today. If you're putting binding on your quilt, you may want to know how to figure out the amount of binding you'll need. There are a couple of calculators online that you can use. I know quiltingparadise.com has one, which is one that I use a lot. But there's several others. I think a lot of people trust the one on Quilting Paradise. But if you want to do it yourself, all you have to do is measure the width and the length of your quilt, and then just add those 4 measurements together, and you'll have the length of binding that you need. I always like to add a little bit extra. Never hurts to have more than enough, just in case. So like this quilt is 82 by 99. So I would add 82 to 82, and then add that to 99, and then add that to 99. And that would give me the square inches around my quilt. Depending on how wide you want your binding, it's up to you. I usually use 2.5. I had a strip of fabric left over from when I cut the border of this quilt that I decided to use as the binding. You don't have to do that. You can use whatever color or fabric you want. But I had a strip left over, and it was more than enough to cut the binding for this. I think I cut 10 strips, but if you can tell, I didn't even use all the strips. I really think that I'm going to have enough without adding all that extra. But yeah, that's how you figure out how much binding you need. I know the calculator on quiltersparadise.com allows you to put the width of the fabric that you have. So if you have some fabric you bought, like a yard of fabric, you can put the width of that, like if it's 42 inches or 43 inches. And it will do all that calculation for you, so you'll know how many strips you can get out of that piece of fabric that you have. I think that if you have a yard of fabric, that's way more than enough to go around most good size quilts. So, but like I said, that depends on how wide of batting that you're going to be using. So I am on my 3rd side, and to sew, I'm using the technique where you stop short a 1/4 inch from the edge, like I'm sewing this way, and then I stopped a 1/4 inch, a little bit longer than a 1/4 inch, but a 1/4 inch from the bottom. I stopped sewing that, and then all you do is you take and you turn the binding up this way and then back down, and then you just start sewing on that edge. And that gives you a nice little area where when it comes time to sew the other side of the binding, it folds over and it gives you a mitered corner. This is my favorite way to sew on binding. I used to sew like one edge of I always press my binding now in half, and then I sew the 2 raw edges to the quilt. But I used to sew the binding like this, and there's I think a lot more steps when you do it that way. And by this time, I'm ready to be done with this quilt because I'm excited to get started on another one. And I've been on this quilt long enough, longer than I should have been. But I have to say, the Dresden plate is quite, it took me a while because it's, for one, it's applique, so I applique around the Dresden plate. There's a lot more that goes into the blocks than just with the typical pieced block. And so, I don't know, maybe applique takes longer than most quilting. I've never really thought about it before. I made the task. I did the Dresden plate because I decided that I would do various traditional blocks so that I would gain more experience quilting. So like I did a log cabin, I did flying geese. I did a flying geese quilt, and then the Dresden plate. And I also wanted to make a quilt for each one of my children. So I thought, what better goal than to practice all the traditional blocks so that I know how to do them and make each one for one of my children. So it's working out pretty good. This one is going to be my daughter's. And then the next quilt I make, I'm just going to be doing squares. I'm going to do a smaller quilt for my granddaughter. But I have several people. This is a monster of a quilt. This is really. I even wondered. First, I was going to tell you that I have several people already that in my family that wants a quilt, and so I've probably got already about 8 people that I'm going to be making quilts for this year. But this quilt turned out pretty big. When I was putting it up on my design board, I just kept thinking, well, that's not big enough. That's not wide enough. I don't know about you, but I like a quilt that I have plenty of room under. I don't feel like my feet's going to stick out from underneath it. But I kept adding blocks and kept adding blocks. And then this morning, as I was putting the binding on, I started wondering, maybe I made this too big. But I think it's not even, it doesn't even measure the size of a traditional queen size quilt. I forget the measurements of a queen size. I think a queen size quilt usually runs about 91 by 92 or something like that. Maybe even 96. But well, definitely, I guess it all depends on the kind of quilt that you want to make for the person. So I wanted this one for her to be able, her to put it on her bed, like a bedspread. And look, I don't have quite enough binding, so I'm going to have to add some to this. But I do have some strips already cut. But if I was just making her like a lap size quilt, then there's different measurements for that. I still think that the applique would take just as long because you have to, do the applique around the outside of it. And oh, wow, I'm just about done actually. I thought it was on the third side, and I'm actually on the last side. So not too bad there. I actually may have enough binding already. I thought it was only on my third side. Yay! I had to actually trim some of my edges because my backing fabric, I had the hardest time with this backing, the backing on this quilt. And I ended up having to trim the sides because on one side of the quilt, the backing didn't quite reach the seam as the front, so I had to trim the sides of my quilt down so that my backing and my and the front of my quilt were even. And I guess that's why it's important that when you're cutting the backing for your quilt, that you always extend it larger than your top, about 5 inches. And that way you know for sure that your front and your back's going to match. And a lot of times people like to extend the backing because they're going to quilt. They like to quilt their border and everything. I don't know about you, but I tend to do the final quilting on my border after I get the binding on. And I'm probably the only person in the world that does that. I just feel like that it helps the design a little bit more. But if you think about it, if you quilt before you put the binding on there, that quilting is actually secured a little bit extra under the binding. But I feel pretty confident that my quilting won't come loose. So I always like to wait until after I have the binding to do the finishing quilting on my borders. And I've definitely learned a lot from doing this quilt. I do believe it's made me a better quilter. I ran into situations that helped me understand better about the backing and the batting. So this batting is wool, and I bought enough. I actually had enough for it. But I was quilting my quilt top, and I ran into like a knot in the batting. And I've never done that before, so there was like a lump in the batting. I actually thought I had gotten the batting wrinkled underneath, so it was before I had quilted that area, and I was able to go in and look, and it was just where the batting, there was like a bunched up ball in the batting. Never seen that before. So maybe that's something that happens with wool batting. I don't know. But now I know that when I go to buy batting on the bolt like that, to check it, make sure that there's no knots before I sandwich it. Just little things like that I've learned doing this quilt that I think is going to benefit me in the future quilts that I make. And so actually I do have another. Wait a minute. No. Wait a minute. Where am I at? Oh, okay. So this is going to come up here, and then this folds down here. And wow, I just about have it perfect. But you always want to have a little extra in your binding when you get ready to, let me go ahead and cut the thread on that. You always want to have a little extra length in your binding so that you have more to work with when it comes to. I've got to change out the blade on my machine for cutting. I think it's gotten dull. That's other things that I learned too. I didn't even know that I could do that. So just a lot of different things that I've learned doing this quilt. Okay, I'm coming up to my corner, and so I missed a 1/4 inch there. I stopped sewing a 1/4 inch from the edge, and then I just fold it straight up, so I have like that triangle. Probably can't see it, but there's like just fold it up to where it's going perpendicular. And then I just fold it back down. Make sure my thread is, when I sink and I cut that, I pull my bobbin out and I straighten my thread. I also cleaned my machine this morning before. Looks like I'm just about out of thread too. I think I have enough to finish the binding, but I always clean my machine out after I get through quilting before I put the binding on. And there was so much lint in my machine this morning. But that's a good thing to do. If you check your manual, it will probably, whatever machine you have, it'll probably show you how to clean your machine. And if you're not sure, or if you can't figure it out, I'm sure there's a machine dealer near you, somewhere in town, that would be able to do that for you. I remember my mom, she used to sew on a Brother machine. This was during the 70s. And she always kept a can of oil. She would oil her machine ever so often. But we don't have to do that nowadays. These newer machines, you don't have to oil them. But it's still a good idea to take your machine in and just get it serviced. I am going to have to add. Yeah, I'm going to have to add a little bit to that. So find a strip here. And I'm just going to back tack. So you can always, if you don't have enough binding, you can always add to it as you're going along. Cut it that time. So to add the binding strips together, you're just going to lay the right sides together. And you're just going to lay one crosswise like that. Just straight like that. So you've got one coming this way, and then you've got one going down. You're going to put those corners together like that with the right sides together. And then you're just going to sew a line from this corner down to this corner. And that makes binding. And I know if you went and you bought enough binding that's already, you can buy it already made. It comes in little packages, but I think it's anywhere from $2 to $3 a pack. I'm not quite sure how much you get in a pack, but for a larger quilt, you may have to buy close to 3 packages. I think that's when I started making my own binding, because I just couldn't afford to buy the pre-made batting enough for, so see, and it just connects it. And I really should go over and press this down, but since it's just a little bit, I'm not going to worry too much about it. But I usually iron those seams open. And I am going to go ahead and finish this one up. Cannot believe I'm already this close to finishing. It's been a while that I've been working on it. So I'm getting close to where I need to measure my binding, and I'm just going to fold this piece up. I'm just going to fold this up on itself. I still have my needle in the machine, but you can, well, we'll need to, so I'll go ahead and back stitch that a couple times. But basically I'm just going to take this binding that I'm sewing on now, and I'm going to fold it back on itself. And then this other tail that I left open when I started sewing the binding, it's quite a bit. I always leave quite a bit for myself. So you're just going to fold that down. And you're going to make sure that those two folds come right together evenly, as close as possible, so you can see how that's there. And then I'm just going to take my scissors, and inside these folds I'm just going to make a small snip, not a real big one. I don't want it to go past my 1/4 inch. And get my scissors in there. Just make a snip. And then that way I have a marker with this slit in each one. And then I'm going to open this one up that's coming up. Pull it back up here where I can see what I'm doing. I'm trying to do this without bumping the camera. And you probably still can't see what I'm doing. But I have a notch here and here, and I'm just going to match those 2 notches up. So if you can see this notch here, you can see that one there. I'm just going to put those 2 notches together. And then I'm going to make sure that I get that straight across, 90 degrees. And I think I'm going to pin it so I don't lose it as I'm putting it under the machine. Open that up. Just put a pin on each side. And now I'm just going to sew from this corner to that corner, or that corner to this corner, whichever is easier. I think it will be that one. And I just hit my digital screen. Hopefully I didn't. Everything is good. Sometimes when I'm sewing, whatever I'm sewing will nudge up against it, and I'll start getting like a zigzag stitch. I probably could switch it over there or something. There should be a home screen we can put it on. But thread under my foot so that doesn't come out on me. Make sure I get that straight. I don't have any wrinkles under there. That looks pretty straight. You can also mark it so that you can, so you know you're getting a straight line, but I'm just going to kind of wing it here. Definitely need to change that blade out. And then I'm just going to, before I trim it, I'm going to make sure it's long enough. And this way I'm going to know if I got it long enough. And you can just fold it in, and that looks pretty good. Looks like it's going to fit. So now I can just trim these edges. About a 1/4, well, however wide you want to cut it. I'm just going to trim that square, that square. And then I can trim the seam. Open those up, finger press it. And even though I ripped the seam out where I was sewing, I can always go back up a little bit further and just back tack on the seam that's already there. And that should hold it pretty good. Sure my quilt's nice and flat. I always lay my arm down here because I feel like it helps keep everything flat as it's moving. My bobbin thread's just warning me. Can you believe it? I'm like right here at the end, but I think I'll have enough in my bobbin. It usually warns me while I have a little bit left on there. Hopefully there'll be enough. And that always scares me when it does that. So I'm not expecting it. Even though I put it in there and I knew. And I know it looks like I'm pulling this, but I'm not. I'm just holding it taut, however you say it. Have enough thread and the binding is on. So now all I have to do is flip it under and baste it. I hand baste mine on the other side. It takes a little longer, but I think it gives it a nicer finish. So for hemming the binding, what we're doing is we're folding the binding that we sewed on earlier. We're just folding that towards the back. And so what I do is I will take a straight pin. I line the edge of that binding that we're folding over. I line that edge up with the seam on the back. And I'll take a straight pin through the edge of the binding down into the seam and then out the edge. And that holds it secure enough so that as I'm sewing along, then I can just take the seam out. I mean the pen out. For hemming, there's many different ways to hem. What I do is once you have your thread in, here I'll just show you right quick. What I do is once you've tied the end of your string with a knot, what I do is I will go inside the hem, push it through the fold of the binding and pull it all the way through. So the knot is going to be right there on the inside. And then right next to it, I take my needle and I go back in and bring my needle out this way. And I don't pull too tight, and you'd never notice that seam. You can't even see that it's there. And then to hem this edge down, I always catch it just before that seam. just like that. And then I come up through the edge of that binding. And this way, you never have to worry that your stitch is going to show through on the other side. As long as you stitch right on this side of that seam and then through the very edge, it's also going to hide your stitches. And you won't ever have to worry about that seam going through there. And I don't know, personally, I think this is faster. There's many different ways to bind your quilts, and everybody has their own way of hemming. So if you have a better way of hemming, there's no right way or wrong way. The main idea is that you get your binding sewed down so that it's has a finished look. And it's just, the binding basically is just covering up those raw edges. And as long as those raw edges are covered up, then you don't have to worry about your quilt raveling. If you've ever seen like those ragtime quilts where they cut fabric and sew with the raw edges on the outside, this is the reason we put the binding on, is so that the quilt over time, the edge doesn't do that. It's an old-timey way of finishing a quilt. I personally like the ragtime look, but unless you plan on doing that when you start your quilt, then I personally think that this is the best way to sew that binding down. I personally think this is the best way to sew that binding down. And it goes a lot faster. I've tried it the other ways, and my thread, I don't know if it's because I'm going from this way to this way. I'm right-handed, and so by doing this, I'm going from my right to my left. And the reason for that is because I'm going down in here first. Some people will teach you to go through the top and then the bottom, but it doesn't, I don't feel like it hides the stitch as well, and it's just not as neat once it's done. So if you look, you really can't see that hem. You can see the stitch, but that's not even going to show. And if you wanted to, you could go like right down in that seam if you didn't want the seam to show. It doesn't really show, but if you want to make sure it doesn't show, just go down in that seam and then pull it. But if you go any further past that seam, then you run the risk of it showing on the other side. In other words, your seam will show up over here. A lot faster. When I was younger, my mom, she was a seamstress, and she would bring her sewing whenever she had to do hemming. She would always bring it to the living room and watch TV while she hemmed, and she'd always have like a dozen pins stuck in the edge of the couch. And so when she'd get up, when she was finished hemming, whatever it was she was working on, she'd go back to her sewing room and she would leave the pins in the arm of the chair. And then we would go in and sit down, and we would put our arm down on just the heads of them. If you've ever, it still sticks. It's still a little bit painful. And we would yell, and she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry." Those little things growing up with a mom or a dad as a seamstress. The little things like that most people wouldn't even think about. What's really neat about doing it this way is once you pass your straight pen, you can take it out and then come down here and put it in the next one. Just like that. Fast and easy. I almost spilled an entire thing of pens a while ago. They were on the table. I had gotten some out to pin the binding, and I'd forgotten that they were under the quilt, and so I was moving the quilt, and luckily I heard the canister sliding around. But you can see all these pens falling in the carpet would not be good. Luckily I caught it in time. I would never walk in this room without my shoes on. Even vacuuming doesn't get all the pens out. I think if anybody ever took over this room as a bedroom, we'd probably have to change the carpet so that they wouldn't get pins stuck in their foot. There is nothing worse than walking across the carpet and getting a pin stuck in your foot. One time my brother, he was walking through our living room and he got a pin stuck right between his toes, like just like that. Like, how did you do that? It happens. No matter how careful you try to be, those pins find their way in the carpet or on the arm of the chair. I'm just going to slide this down and get it to the corner. But I mean, even wearing flip-flops doesn't mean I'm safe from not getting a pen stuck in my foot, because they will go right through the flip-flop. So I'm going to zoom if I can. Nope, it's not going to let me zoom out. But we're getting right up to the corner. And I'll show you how, since we did the miter, or the way we did the binding, it's going to make it a lot easier to sew that corner down. And it has such a pretty finished look. So I still have a little ways to go. I'm still hemming right here. So that has such a nice finished look to it. The other way, I was trying to follow the other way when I first started, and it would, a knot somewhere. I was getting them stuck on the pen, and I got really frustrated. I was like, why am I doing it this way? This is not the way I usually hem. It's kind of like riding a bike. Once you start out hemming a certain way, I think it's hard to do it a different way. It just feels awkward. You always revert back to doing it the way you first learned how to do it. My mom taught me how to do it this way many, many, many years ago. We used to do Traponto. She had a customer that she made cushions for her gift shop on the beach. And we would earn extra money during the summer doing the Traponto for my mom and those cushions. Which I think she'd pay us like 50 cents a pillow top. to sew around the, I don't even think they make the panels anymore that have like the birds and the deers. But we used to sew around some of the animals on those cushion tops and trapunto it. 50 cents per cushion top. It's good candy money because it took time. It took time to sew around those deer and those animals and then stuff them with fiber fill. And then you had to close them up. Once you got the, couldn't put too much fiber fill in there. You didn't want them to be hard. You wanted the 3D look. You wanted to be soft, cushiony. But I don't even think they make those panels anymore. I know they make panels, but these were like the little square, I don't know, what, probably 8 by 9 or something like that. And you could get like 3 or 4 of them. And usually greens and browns. I think every now and then they had like some beachy ones with like shells and stuff. They're like light blue. Gotta love the 70s. All this yellow, it's kind of hard to see. I'm not wearing my glasses either. I'm kind of still in denial about having to wear glasses. I had good eyesight most of my life. Just like within the last year, it's got to where things are blurry and I actually have to wear glasses to read. Alright, so I'm at the corner. And basically you're just going to trim some of these scragglies. That's what I call them. So basically what you're going to do is you just fold that down all the way out as if you're, well, just fold it all the way out to where it makes that V. And then you can sew that. I've kind of got it caught right there, but that's okay because I can push it under with my needle. Okay, and then I'm just going to fold that over to where this edge meets that seam. And then I'm going to put a pin in there, just like we did over here. And then in this corner, I'm going to catch the edge of this side and that side, that corner. And then go back down here and up through that side. It's pretty mitered corner. It's so pretty.